Hello, everyone. It's time to look back for the look back of the 3 weeks that we have been studying, and looking ahead for week number 4, which we're going to have midterm exam. So let's take a look at the shared screen. Here we go. All right. In the first week, we introduced all of these concepts, right? Definitional function, one-to-one, increasing, decreasing, even, odd functions. And then we studied all of these different functions, right? And in the simplest form. In week number 2, we introduced all these trig functions: sine, arcsine, cosine, arccosine. And one particular theme we constantly are doing is that given input, we produce output. So from input to output. And the other category of questions is that from output to produce input, to solve for input. So we constantly have these two kinds of questions and issues and in our study. In week number 3, we continue to study trig functions, and until all the trig functions are being covered. So arcsine, arccosine, sine, cosine, arctangent, tangent, arccotangent, and cotangent. Okay, so all of these functions have been studied in the past weeks in the form of given input to find output, which is ARD, DRA. So in the past 3 weeks, we studied very, very fast, and we reviewed all of these functions. So let's take a look. And going back to week number 1, when we have the general introductions. So in our list, right, for all of these functions, right, all of these rules, and we have studied in addition to functions since first week until week number 3, and we have functions such as, I want you to see it in this perspective, that we have input, okay, which are angles for sine, and the function is, for example, sine, right? And the output is sine x. And that's our sine function, right? So we want to know their domain and range. And on this, we continued through week 2 and week 3, which it can be cosine, right? It can be tangent. It can be arctangent, cotangent. I use A just to indicate, which has the same role as X, right? Which these are the input. The input are angles, right? All of these inputs for sine, cosine. Oh, wait, I missed the cosine. Okay, cosine. Okay, these input produces output. Output are ratios, right? So all of these are output are ratio. All these output are ratio from A to ratio, from angle to ratio. And then we studied arcsine, arccosine. Okay, so these other functions. And by the way, we need to be aware of the domain and range, which we have all discussed throughout the past 3 weeks, right? And then continue this concept. We have f dual function, and these functions are from ratio to angles. ratio to angles. So what are these ratio to angles, right? So one of them is being arcsine. Arcsine is also noted as, suppose the ratio is called x, okay? And the arcsine produces angles, and angles, this angle has its own specific domain, has its own range, right? We talk about that in week number 2 and week number 3. And similarly, we emphasize that the ratio, it could be arc cosine, right? It could also be arc tangent. Okay, they each have their own range, domain, range we want you to be aware of, right? For example, the domain for arcsine is between -1 to +1. So this ratio is between -1 to +1 to +1. Okay. You have learned that in the lessons. Okay, for arc cosine, the same thing, but their range, however, are different. The range for arcsine is, as we have studied in the lessons, is between -π/2 to π/2. To π/2. And for arc cosine, however, is between, we have those, all of those details covered, right? Between 0 and pi. All right, and last but not least, we have arctangent, right? Arctangent, the domain is all real numbers. Okay, so all real numbers, all real, right? And the range is almost the same, but not the same as arcsine, which is arctan, between less than, okay, strictly less than, greater than -π/2 and strictly less than π/2. So these are all the functions we have been studying in the past 3 weeks, and their various composition. Okay, and composition, we meant that, you know, there are various compositions such as, right, just to give you some examples, right? So we have sine, arcsine, composition, right? Arcsine, sine composition, right? And similarly, it's about, you know, cosine, arc, cosine composition, right? So these compositions, cosine, arc, cosine, compositions, arc, cosine, cosine. So we have been studying these things and the tangents. Okay, then you say, how about arc cotangent and arc cosecant? And those functions are arc secant. They're not used very much. They're hardly used. So we're not going to study them. All right. So for arc sine, arc cosine, arc tangent, that's enough. And for the composition we have studied. And 10. Okay. So these are major part of the functions. And so they all fall into the rule, right? These rules, as we mentioned, that these are all functions. Some of them are one-to-one, some of them are increasing, some of decreasing, some of them even, some of them are odd. So these are the rules we have studied. And of course, some of these questions is from input to output, right? So what are the from input output? So when we were doing the graph, is we are going from input to output, input to output. We have done all of those graphs, right? We've done input to output for sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent. And we did all the graphs for arcsine, arccosine, arctangent. And we understand what kind of quantities are input, what kind of quantities are output. So for sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, angles are input, ratios are output. For arcsine, arccosine, arctangent, ratios are input, the angles are output. So the ARD is being used extensively, okay? And the other kind, right, we studied, which is solving trig equations, right? You can find these concepts in the first 3 weeks, okay? Is that we know the output from output to input. So one types is that we've gone from for functions, all of these are functions, right? So the type of question we're dealing with is either from input to output, right? So sometimes it goes this way, input to output, or some other time it goes from output to input. Okay, so output to input. Output to input. So we only have these two kinds of questions if you look at all the functions involved. And these functions are going to be used in your calculus classes. All of these functions will be used in your calculus classes. That's why we spent 3 weeks to cover their related concepts. And so that's the summary for chapter for week number 1, week number 2, and week number 3. Okay, of course there are lots of details, and I hope you guys follow the lessons and take notes and write it down and do it over to make sure you'll be be very fluent with all of these. So what's coming up? Okay, so week number 4. Week number 4, we're going over trig formula. Okay, I have a diagram. In this diagram, okay, I'll show you the diagram. This diagram is something you can use and you will be using pretty often. Number 1, these formula, you can use them directly. And number 2, I encourage you guys to learn to derive all of these formula by yourself. And that will increase your algebraic skill. Okay, so I have recorded lessons in this week as to guide you through the entire deriving process. So these arrows, as it will be explained in the lesson, how to derive all of them. If you can do that favor for yourself, you not only will be very good with these trig formula and their derivatives and derive the form, you will also be very good. You'll also improve your algebra tremendously. And so this is the formula sheet. And going back to week number 4, you can see there's a lot of deriving. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these 3 sections. I mean, they're not, sorry, it's more than 3 sections. Okay, so let me just check on these and tell you about it. So these are about deriving these formula. It's about deriving these formula. It's related to the trig formula deriving and some simple identities. And it's a very short video, but all of these 5 lessons is about deriving the formula. And so I basically hold your hands to go through those steps. So when you watch those lessons, I recommend you do it alongside the lessons. Okay. The next part we're gonna go over is that composition, composite of trig functions, and decomposition. Composition and decomposition. Okay, composition and decomposition is very, very much used in calculus. And they will show up in the form of in the chapters talking about chain rule, okay, implicit differentiation, and later in calculus 2, it will be used in integration by parts, those techniques, and you will see a lot of composition and decomposition of functions. And next, okay, the proving identities. Proving identities, I have covered a lot of examples, and there's some homework guys for you guys to follow. Mainly this week is about deriving. Okay, it's about deriving, derive. Okay, make sure you don't drink and derive. Just kidding. Okay, but I mean it. Don't drink and derive. Okay, make sure you are you know what you're doing. All right, there's 2 quizzes only this week, but there's a midterm exam. Midterm exam is available only for 3 days. Okay, so be sure you plan ahead. Midterm guide is a short guide. Maybe I think it's different from what I'm doing here, which is covers the past 3 weeks. And if you have any questions doing homework or you have any issues about these lessons, please let me know. And I'll be looking forward to interact with you on Pronto, which is our major platform to connect. Thank you for watching.